Today, we're honoring the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura. So much to say about Bhaktivinoda Thakura. Here's a few things. The categories of his gifts to the disciplic line are outstanding. Then there's details beneath those headings, but here's some of the headings. He revived Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission when it had drifted into a state that was not respectable in the world. And not respectable in the world because the teachings of Lord Chaitanya had been diffused and deviated and represented by apasampradayas instead of the genuine. The genuine thread was still there, but it was not prevalent. And the apasampradayas were prevalent. And consequently, there was a disregard, a disdain for Mahaprabhu because of the Upper Sampradaya teachings. And Bhaktivinoda Thakura faced it and lifted and widely propagated the actual teachings of Lord Chaitanya by his life and by his writings. So very significant. It was a turnaround. And then following him, of course, Bhaktisiddhanta and Prabhupada. But, amazing contribution. Another major contribution was his books. 100 books. 100 books. And not only his writings, but publishing of other writings of our sampradaya and other sampradayas, and scriptures, and verifying the sources of those scriptures, because that's a big thing when you're publishing scripture. What's the source? Because there's many, many different sources. So book publication. Restoring the correct place of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's birthplace. Major achievement. His predictions, which meant, giving blessings and benedictions to the future, following his life, the future of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. He became the father of the next in line of disciplic succession, major accomplishment or service to the Vaishnavas. So we're going to hear about these and more. He established at all levels, from the highest in pure Sanskrit to the intellectuals, to Bengali writings that were for everybody, down to the villages of Bengal, the Namahata program. Now we in ISKCON call it Bhakti Vriksha, but it's modeled after Namahata. So he made persons that weren't literate accessible to Lord Chaitanya's teachings in a very creative, very simple way. So he could address all audiences. An amazing Acharya. So we're going to hear something about his life and his contributions. These are the dates of his appearance and disappearance. These are his deities at his place in Navadvip. These are Gaur Gadadhar deities. Prabhupada gave us Gaur Nitai. He personally favored Gaur Gadadhar. And what's the significance? Not so clearly explained anywhere that I've come across, but he had a strong attraction to the nature of spontaneous love for Krishna. And Gaur Gadadhar worship, as far as I can understand it nurtures that kind of mood of devotion to Lord Chaitanya. The mood of Gaur Nitai is a mood of preaching. Not that Bhaktivinoda Thakura wasn't in the mood of preaching, but his personal mood, along with preaching, was this spontaneous devotion to Krishna. Here's a photograph. There are a number. He was at the cusp of technology inventions. Some, and one of those was watches. In Europe, particularly in Germany and in Switzerland, there was a fascination for watches. There's a fascination for lots of things. But he, as you see, he has in his vest pocket a pocket watch. And here's a photograph of a pocket watch, not necessarily his. And one of the ways that he accomplished what he accomplished was he was very fastidious about the use of time. So here's a little description of his time management policies. In Jagannath Puri, this is a description of his life in Jagannath Puri, taken directly, cut and paste from Rupa Vilasa's book, The Seventh Goswami. That's another of his contributions, major contributions. As the six Goswamis wrote books and established the places of Krishna's pastimes, he wrote books and established the places of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, and passed that on to Bhaktisiddhanta to expand it, both. He was never idle, being always engaged in the service of the Lord. How so? Between 7:30 and 8 p.m., he would go to bed. He would then rise just before 10 p.m. And I don't know if they had such a thing as alarm clocks. Light his oil lamp and write books until 4 a.m. Then he would again rest for a maximum of half an hour. So that's between 2 to 3 hours total, daily. 2.5 to 3. At 4:30 a.m., he would wash his hands and face, sit down, and chant on his beads. He never showed his beads to anyone, but would chant on them constantly as time permitted. 7 a.m. So japa from 4:30 to 7. He would answer all correspondence. Half an hour. 7:30 a.m. he would read various religious and philosophical works. 1 hour. And at 8:30 he received visitors, if any. 8:30. Or else continue to read until 9:30. At that time he would walk. 9:30. He would walk back and forth on the veranda of his house, contemplating different religious questions and solving them in his mind. Sometimes he would solve them aloud, as if preaching to some unseen guest. He would rest briefly, 9:30 to 9:45. Good luck. If you've had 2.5 to 3 hours and you're lying down, you're going to wake up 15 minutes later, right? Then take bath and breakfast, which usually consisted of a half quart of milk, 2 chapatis, and some fruit. 9:45, breakfast. 9:55, it was short breakfast. The Thakur would don his uniform and leave for court in his carriage, Jagannath Puri. As a magistrate, he wore a coat and pants. On his neck were 6 strands of large Tulsi beads. He was resolute in his court decisions and would decide a case immediately, not tolerating any humbug. He did his business and left. He shaved his head monthly and never cared what anyone thought of it. The lawyers and Englishmen were astonished by the Thakur's capacity for work. At 10 a.m., court began. He would hear between 30 and 50 cases per day. India's legal system. Between 30 and 50 cases per day. Yet he finished by 1 p.m. What took other magistrates 1/2 hour, he finished in 5 minutes. He took another 2 minutes to write the judgment in detail. Some of his British superiors became envious and tried to discourage him, but he was not affected. 1 p.m. he went home, refreshed himself, and then returned to work at 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Every evening after court duties, Bhaktivinoda Thakura would translate some Sanskrit religious works into Bengali by dictating it to a secretary. Then there was an evening bath and meal consisting of a little rice, 2 chapatis, and another half quart of milk. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura worked with a pocket watch so that everything he did was on schedule. Despite his heavy domestic and official responsibilities, Bhaktivinoda Thakura's every moment was embellished with an intense desire to render service to the Lord. Time management. Using his pocket watch, celebrated pocket watch. It's described that when he was young, his father died. So he went to live with his grandfather or uncle, I can't remember. And he was trained and educated in a place that wasn't in Calcutta. He came back to Calcutta. And he did his higher studies with the Tagore family, who was from his father. And the family in which he was born was wealthy and aristocratic, and so he had that kind of lifestyle and association of others. And when he finished his college, because of family connections and friends, he was given an appointment as a managing director of some business, some company. It's described in his biography. One of the first things he did was, by checking the books, he saw that there was some discrepancy in favor of the company. So he contacted the person who was not given the proper return on his money, and he gave the proper return on his money. The owner of the business came to know, and he advised the Thakur, "You have the wrong profession. You should become a teacher, a Brahmin." And so he studied to become a teacher. In course of time, that transformed or transmuted into becoming involved in legal work. He then quickly became, as a young man, became appointed to the government service in court systems. And before he got to Puri, one of the places he was assigned was a place where the local people were worshipping a ghost in a tree. And it was, they were afraid. They worshipped the ghost in a tree because they were afraid that the ghost might cause trouble. So they made offerings and this and that's. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur didn't have to do this. He was a court officer. But he took his earnings, gave a donation to a brahmana, and requested a brahmana to sit under a tree and read Srimad Bhagavatam every day. So he was happy. And the story goes that when he finished the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, reciting it, a branch of the tree towards the top broke. A voice from the tree, the sky came, it was the ghost who was now liberated, and he thanked the brahmana for freeing him from the circumstance of being in a ghost condition, so he was now free to go on and move on. So no more ghost worship. Just, young man, but great faith in Srimad Bhagavatam. Then comes his being posted as the magistrate in Puri. Now I've come to understand that I'm accustomed to hearing and saying, that's a high position, but it's next to governor, and the governor is appointed. The governor is appointed by the British government to rule. He governs. And then next in line is the magistrate. The magistrate, it doesn't just sit in court. The magistrate does many things on behalf of the government. So the government wanted Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Puri for two reasons. Puri is an important place. And the second reason was there was a big problem in Puri. And the big problem in Puri was Bhishika Sen. And Bhishika Sen was a mystic who lived outside of Puri in the forest. And he was making pronouncements about, his mission was to overthrow the British. And because he was a mystic, people were afraid of Bhishika Sen. So they knew that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was respected and brave, not intimidated by anyone or anything. And so it was his first assignment, deal with Bhishika Sen. Now he's a magistrate, but he does other things. Some of the details about Bhishika Sen is a particular form of Apasampradaya from Lord Chaitanya. So he claimed to be a follower of Lord Chaitanya. One of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's 100 books was a book just describing the 13 Apasampradayas and then replacing their misunderstandings with proper understandings. Very scholarly for historical purposes. So he's a mystic in this Apasampradaya, and he was renowned for his austerities, and it is understood that mystics who do austerities, they store their mystic powers in their hair, so they generally keep really long hair. So he had really long hair, and he did mystical things with his hair. He would wave his hair back and forth, and fire would come from his hair. So he was known not just as Bhishika Sen, but Bhagavan Mahavishnu. And he had 2 avatar associates as his main buddies. And there were thousands of followers. He's mystic and so forth and so on. He was known for intense austerities. This is how he built his strength. And one of his things was he would invite ladies from Puri the aristocratic ladies from Puri to come visit his ashram in the country and hear stories, hear his teachings. And one of his favorite teachings was rasa dance, and after narrating rasa dance, he would pollute the ladies. And then they came back and, it became known in Puri, so it was like a big deal. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur wanted to bring this man to court. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur requested the police. He's not the governor, he's magistrate, but he requested police to bring the person to jail so he can be tried in court. They wouldn't go because they were afraid of this man. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur personally went with the police and confronted him. And the conversation went, who are you? And he gave his Bhishika name. And he said, it's come to my attention that these kinds of activities are what you're up to. Would you like to reply? He gave a type of answer that led Bhaktivinoda Thakur to say, very well, you come with me. We're going to bring you to court. And he shook his head, and fire came from his hair, and the guard stood back. Bhaktivinoda Thakur grabbed him by the arm. Let's go. He was not intimidated by anything. And then the man agreed to go. He said, I'll go with you, this is my Leela. So he was put in prison, waiting for the date for his trial. He started making pronouncements that he would destroy Bhaktivinoda Thakur's family. Sure enough, while he was in the jail, engaged in his fasting activity, one of the daughters of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he became very seriously ill with fever, and his wife Bhagavati said, "Let this man go. We might lose our daughter. It's not worth the risk." He wouldn't. In course of time, his daughter overcame her fever, and he was brought to trial, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur pronounced his prison sentence, and as he was being taken out of the courtroom, he instructed one of the, whatever you call them, guards, to cut his hair. So right in the courtroom, he cut his long hair. And when he cut his hair, he fell to the ground, unconscious. So all his power that was stored in his hair was gone. And within some period of time, a week or so, he died in jail. And the Bhishika Sain. It's just an example. In my way of thinking of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was fearless. He was risking. He also got feverish. And as he was writing the sentence, because it not just say something, you have to write something, his hand was trembling, etc. He was inflicted with fever. But he wasn't afraid. He didn't stop. And he was protected, ultimately. A powerful guy, Bhishika Sain, but not powerful like a pure devotee. There was another big danger for Bhaktivinoda Thakur, just to give us a sense of the timing of things. 1874. So he's looking after the Jagannath temple. And looking at the Jagannath temple, one of the things he did was he looked at the accounting. And he noticed that there was 80,000 rupees that were missing. And it was taken by the king of Puri. So what do you do when that happens? because there's the king of Puri, he is a government officer, and in charge of the, ultimate in charge of the affairs of the temple, and here's an embezzlement. So he made a very reasonable settlement. The king should replace all of that money that was missing by personally spending the money for the 52 Bhog offerings every day. That was another contribution. When he took responsibility for the Jagannath temple, there was laxity in the offerings and the procedures for offerings, and so he restored that. So 52 offerings a day means as soon as one is removed, another is placed, etc. Very, very prompt procedures. So the king was resentful. The king had an idea to kill him. But Bhaktivinoda Thakura was too popular, so he thought that wasn't a good idea. So instead, what he decided was to have a sacrifice for 30 days with 50 pundits reciting mantras that are meant for killing another person. And his wife came to know, because he was like, don't tell anybody, but everybody knew. The king was doing this. And his wife said, do something. And he was fearless. He just continued. And sure enough, Krishna protected. And what happened at the end of the 30th day, his son died. The king's son died. Because if you do some of those things and it doesn't work, it goes back to the person who's the one initiating the procedure. It doesn't say what happened after that. Like, did the king apologize? But the king certainly got a lesson. There was another intimidation that came from Raghunath Das Babaji, having to do with his speaking against, he didn't do anything violent, but speaking against Bhaktivinoda Thakura. The circumstance was, Bhaktivinoda Thakura was daily giving Bhagavatam classes in the Jagannath Vallabha Gardens. He called the group the Bhagavat Samsat. And the Jagannath Vallabha Gardens is the same place where Ramananda Roy would go to speak Srimad Bhagavatam, so he went there. And it was very popular. And Raghunath Das Babaji was also a popular person at that time. And he started speaking against Bhaktivinoda, telling people don't go, and saying bad things. And because of that act of criticizing a pure devotee, he became inflicted with a very severe disease and fever. And when Bhaktivinoda Thakura, who knew that he was being criticized by Raghunath Das Babaji, and then he heard that he had this fever, he made arrangements for the cure of his fever. He knew the right medicines and this and that. Raghunath Das Babaji had a dream in which, now that this detail is not so clear in my mind, but a dream where he should go and apologize. Yeah, that's what happened before the medicine. A dream where he should apologize because he had offended. This illness was due to his offense. So he came somehow in this disease condition to Bhaktivinoda Thakura and apologized for his speaking against him. And Bhaktivinoda Thakura asked, why are you speaking against me? Because you're speaking the Bhagavatam, and you don't even wear neck beads or tilak. So this isn't right. So I was, you're not a qualified person. The external markings of tilak and neck beads for Vaishnav. And Bhaktivinoda Thakura's reply is, I'm not yet wearing tilak or neck beads because I have not yet found my Diksha Guru. And at least during his time, we have tilak and neck beads before Diksha, but during his time that wasn't done. And so Raghunath Das Babaji said, oh, and this is when Bhaktivinoda gave the medicine. His fever was cured, and then afterwards, the two, Raghunath Das Babaji and Bhaktivinoda Thakura, became very dear friends. Now I want to describe yet another person that's just, again, a cut and paste from, just to give an idea, Bhaktivinoda Thakura has 10 children. He's a government officer. He's like, very different than a Babaji at this stage of his life. But he has very close relationships with Babajis. There's one mentioned in his biography. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, one of his 100 books was an autobiography that was a letter to one of his sons, Lalit Prasad Datta. And Lalit Prasad, Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote details and details and details and details and details about his life. And one of the details he writes about is about Swarup Das Babaji in his autobiography. So here's what he wrote. All day he would perform bhajan within his small cottage, and in the evening he would come out and pay his prostrated obeisances to the holy Tulsi tree. Then he would loudly chant the holy name and sing, dance, and cry in ecstasy. At this time, many Vaishnavas would come to get his darshan. Some of them would offer him small handfuls of Jagannath Prasad. In order to satisfy his hunger, he would consent to accept it, but he would not accept much. At this time, one of the Vaishnavas would read from Chaitanya Bhagavat or other Gaudiya Vaishnava literature, and he would simply listen. By 10 p.m., he would go into his kutir and again start his bhajan. In the middle of the night, he would go to the shore of the ocean alone, wash his face, and take a complete bath. He did this for fear that some Vaishnava would perform some service for him without his knowledge. Since he was blind in both eyes, the question arises, how could he go to the ocean in the middle of the night to take his bath? Only Mahaprabhu knows. This is Bhaktivinoda writing about Swarup Das Babaji. Only Mahaprabhu knows. There was no doubt that he was a Siddhapurusha, a spiritually perfected soul. He did not have a single material desire. In the evening, I would sometimes go to take darshan of his lotus feet. He would talk with the people, and his speech was very sweet. He instructed me, Krishna Nam, Bulibe Na. Never forget the name of Krishna. Nice, huh? And that's just a sampling of his activities in Puri and the caliber of persons with whom he interacted. And he had great respect for them, and obviously they also had for him. Now, for his public service, Bhaktivinoda Thakur would dress accordingly. He has a number of photographs with very fancy clothes. He's detached, but very fancy clothes because of his position. And commonly, it's described elsewhere that it's during certain times of the day or week or whatever, he would meet with VIPs, and his method of interacting with them, he would very patiently listen to their point of view, and by the method of humble persuasion and his own spiritual dynamism, he would attempt to bring them to a higher position. The humble persuasion was his common strategy or approach to helping lift people. as opposed to his son, who was Sringa Guru, and he would confront mischief and deviations in a strong way. Here's another photograph or portrait where he has a nice fancy hat and another nice set of clothes, for his public profile purposes. Here's where he's wearing his traditional Vaishnava attire. And there's his 10 children, his wife Bhagavati on his left, the 2 lady servants in the back, and on the upper left corner, that's Bimal Prasad, or Bhaktisiddhanta. Here's a photograph of his neck beads, how he would wear his neck beads. And most of the photos of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he has books on his lap, because he was so absorbed in books. He's wearing a big beard here because he strictly observed Chaturmasya during the 4 months of the rainy season. And one of his most noted books, kind of an epic book, is Jaiva Dharma, the religion of all souls. In this book, it's a retelling of Nectar of Instruction, Nectar of Devotion, Dasamula Tattva, and one other thing. So he's not. It's not. So it's something of a fiction. It's a certain writing style. It's a discussion between 2 very young persons who went on pilgrimage to meet these associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, just 3 generations after Mahaprabhu. So there's, it's a dialogue format. Questions, answers, questions, answers, questions, answers. And in that dialogue, it lays out everything about Lord Chaitanya's teachings correctly, properly. And that was part of the intention, to leave and give to the world a very clear picture of what Lord Chaitanya's teachings were in that format. It's a very important book. I know because of my relationship with Devamrita Maharaj and his role as a BBT trustee, he's having one person, it's probably done by now, gather up all the different versions of Jaiva Dharma, because there's different versions, unfortunately, although it's one book and it's not so long ago, so that there can be a proper rendering of Jaiva Dharma. It's a very important book. The format is this. This is Babaji Maharaj, and there's the 2 young students asking questions of Babaji Maharaj. And one of the sections in 10 parts is Dasamula Tattva. Maybe you're familiar with this book. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, His Life and Precepts, by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura. This is reprinted by Chaitanya Saraswat Mat, but it was originally written by Bhaktivinoda Thakura in that same year, 1896. Same year that Prabhupada was born, same year that Jaiva Dharma was published, same year that this English writing, it has 2 parts, his life and his precepts. The life is the details of Chaitanya Charitamrita summarized, the flow of the activities of Mahaprabhu's life. And the second half is his teachings, and his teachings are the Dasamul, the 10 essential teachings. In his 100 books, I gave a seminar once on Dasamula some years ago in Vrindavan. And my research indicated that of the 100 books, it appears in something like 80 of them. It was a very standard way of summarizing Mahaprabhu's teachings. Later, in the year 1901, one of his final books was Bhagavad Arka Marichimala, and in the end of that book, like kind of an addendum, he discloses something. And he said, normally something like this isn't told, but I feel compelled. The composition of this book is the result of Srila Damodar coming before me in a vision and instructing me to write this book. And he gave detailed teachings on the first verse, 111 Bhagavatam, and so that's in the book. So the format of Bhagavad Arka Marichimala is topic by topic by topic. Long list of topics that are within the Bhagavatam. And he would state the topic and then give verses from the Bhagavatam that illuminate that topic. So, Arka Marichimala, Sri Bhagavata Arka Marichimala. He, as mentioned, he wrote his own autobiography in the form of a letter to his son Lalit Prasad, and later it became, his own Swa Nikita Jivani, and that's his autobiography. This photograph is taken in Navadvip, where he was with two of his associates, I can't recall, a son and a friend or something like that. And from a rooftop in Navadvip one evening, Bhaktivinoda Thakura saw. And he asked the two with him, do you see what I see? And they saw. It was a vision. It was a very tall structure off in the rice fields on the other side of the river Jamuna, which could be the Ganga. And then they saw the same thing the next night. So he did some research, and it turns out that he accepted, long story, that that's the place, the birthplace of Mahaprabhu. And it's not only a tall structure, but according to Ananta Samhita, that structure would appear later, this very, very tall structure. And details about how he came to this conclusion, because he was a government officer, he had access to government records, and he looked at maps that go back in time and back in time and back in time, showing that Mahaprabhu's birthplace was on the eastern side of the Ganga, not the western side of the Ganga, where Navadvip town was, and many other references without the details. And so he came to this conclusion. And one of the ways that he wanted to verify, even more important than historical records and visions, was Jagannath Das Babaji, who the photograph of him is here. This is a drawing of that photograph. He was in Navadvip by the request of Bhaktivinoda Thakura that they could stay together for some time, because previously Jagannath Das Babaji was living in Vrindavan. Specifically, he was living at Surya Kund in Vrindavan. And Bhaktivinoda Thakura got his association. Jagannath Das Babaji became his Shiksha Guru, and Jagannath Das Babaji accepted Bhaktivinoda Thakura's invitation to come and stay in Navadvip. So he did. And he was very old, as you can see from this painting. Here's the photograph again. Very old. And he was 130 years old, something like that. And because of his age and his physical condition, he had to be carried. So Bhaktivinoda Thakura arranged for Jagannath Das Babaji to be carried in his basket to the place where he had this vision. He lined it up, etc. And he heard from the local people, this particular plot of land all around in that area, it's agricultural land. It's rice fields. But they couldn't use it for anything because it wouldn't grow anything. It wouldn't grow rice. It wouldn't grow tomatoes. It wouldn't grow even eggplant, like a very hardy vegetable. It only grew tulsi trees. So he brought Jagannath Das Babaji to this place, celebrated event, and although he's lame and nearly blind, he jumped out of the basket and declared Mahaprabhu, the place of Mahaprabhu's birth. He then made arrangements to construct a little temple. The temple that you see on the left, that was done by Bhaktisiddhanta, his son. In the back, you see a kind of an orangish building that he personally constructed or arranged for it to be constructed, and gave his son the mandate to make this more formal temple where the deities are today. And it's a nice detail also. When the foundation for that white birthplace of Mahaprabhu temple was being dug, they found in the ground the deity that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's father worshipped, Adhokshaja Vishnu deity. So archaeological evidence confirming what Bhaktivinoda Thakur knew by his spiritual acumen. That was one of the things. Because he had access to government records, and scripture, after Mahaprabhu's departure, the course of the Ganges shifted from west to east, and the place where Mahaprabhu's birthplace was underneath the river. So mud started to accumulate above the birthplace. And then after some time, the course of the Ganges shifted back more to the west. And so the Navadvip town, which was rather new, was on the west side of the river. But the scriptures and everything else indicates it was on the right side or the east side of the river. So that was one of the, factual evidences or historical evidences that convinced him that the Navadvip town that's only recent is not the birthplace of Mahaprabhu. So it was a very important detail. And he wrote that this temple that he had seen in vision would one day be built, which then described in Ananta Samhita. There's the picture of Temple of Vedic Planetarium. When he was in government service in Navadvip, he made this his headquarters, and Svananda Sukhada Kunja was given this name by Bhaktivinoda Thakur because he saw it to be the headquarters for Namahata, because just down the street from this place, it's very close to the Mayapur temple. It's on the other side of the Jalangi River, one of the tributaries of the Ganges. And inside the gate, there's his home, and to the right of his home is his samadhi and bhajan kutir. And to the right of that is Gorkishore Das Babaji's bhajan kutir. Because Jagannath Das Babaji, being a Babaji, he didn't have residence. Mainly he stayed in Navadvip town. But he would regularly come to hear, a Babaji would regularly come to hear from a Grahastha, because he was spiritually qualified. Here is something that Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes about Svananda Sukhada Kunja. My small cottage is shining beautifully within that most enchanting garden called Svananda Sukhada Kunja. Living there, I will sing Lord Krishna's holy name, and I will greedily hanker for that time when I will get the service of him and his associates. The place was important to him. Here's a photograph again of the outside, the entrance gate. The main building is right behind the gate. Here's the English and Bengali of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakura's Bhajan Kutir. And here's where his samadhi is. The murti at his samadhi is at the far end on the right. There's a nice clock in the background. He had a personal servant, and he made a samadhi for his personal servant, Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj's samadhi. There's a photograph of him, or painting of him. And so if you go around his samadhi, that's one of the things you'll see. You'll also see these Gaur Gadadhar deities, not the same ones that we saw before. Here's a closer photo of Gaur Gadadhar, those same deities, at his samadhi place. Again, Gaur Gadadhar. Again, Gaur Gadadhar. And in the main building, here's his room. Nice little table, very clean, simple. Notice the position of the table and the place where he sat. To the side is a bed with a mosquito net. And there's a photograph by where he would rest. And one of the things he had was this, driven by fire, was a fan, because it gets pretty hot in Bengal sometimes. And, his supply of books kept this way. His personal belongings, these are all in Svananda Sukhada Kunja, utensils that he would regularly use. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would also visit and spend time. This is the room where he would stay. The place where he would sit in a table. Here's a photograph of the outside of the building at the far end. That dome, tall dome, that's his samadhi. The yellow structure on the right, that's Gorkishore Das Babaji's Bhajan Kutir. And here's the photograph of what's inside the Bhajan Kutir. So this is some nice photographs of Svananda Sukhada Kunja. I think there's a little music. Let's see what happens. This is in Radhakund. He spent time at Radhakund, and he had a Bhajan Kutir at Radhakund. And at the time of his departure, a Pushpa Samadhi was established for him, as well as a Pushpa Samadhi of Bhaktisiddhanta. Obviously, they were very close in more ways than one. Here's the sitting place with a pretty interesting type of chair of Bhaktisiddhanta, the bed where he stayed, his walking cane and shoes. In Jagannath Puri, Bhakti Kuti is part of a larger property when Bhaktivinoda Thakur accepted the Babaji stage of life. He stayed here in seclusion and engaged simply in chanting. It was a quite large property, and this is part of that quite large property that ISKCON acquired and have established a temple in Puri. When you go to Puri, or hopefully we'll go to Puri next year, Kartik time. And it's very close to the sea and just short walking distance from the Samadhi of Haridas Thakur, another celebrated place in Puri. Here's a little story taken from his biography. We're almost done. In Calcutta in 1908, very close to the end of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's life, 3 months before Bhaktivinoda Thakur accepted the renounced order meaning Babaji, Sir William Duke, Chief Secretary of Bengal, admitted that he had considered the Thakur's extraordinary abilities as district magistrate a threat to British control. I wanted to take you out of office. I thought that if there were many men qualified as you in Bengal, then the English would have to leave. But now he begged the Thakur's forgiveness after hearing Sir William Duke's apology. The Thakur replied, I considered you to be a good friend and well-wisher all along. The Thakur admitted later to being astonished that this man had wanted to do him harm. But he was so pleased by his repentant attitude that he gave him all his blessings. And this is the last. This is a very old photograph in the Babaji stage when he was living in Puri. His features look different, but it's an actual photograph of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He wrote a poem at the time, because this is Bhaktivinoda Thakur's departure or disappearance day. Here's a poem that he wrote. He reasons ill, who says that Vaishnavas die when thou art living still and sound. The Vaishnavas die to live, and living try to spread the holy name around. Obviously, it's written in English because it's rhyming. And we're honoring Bhaktivinoda Thakur similarly. Although he's gone physically, he still lives through his teachings. And last but not least, a little Bhadra Purnima reminder for our, not just the people in the room, but those that are live stream participating or may hear recordings sometime soon. Today's date is the 8th, correct? Today is Thursday the 8th, and then Friday the 9th, and Saturday is Bhadra Purnima, the 10th. Here's the verse from the Bhagavatam. If on the full moon day of the month of Bhadra, one places Srimad Bhagavatam on a golden throne and gives it as a gift, of course you can gift yourself or somebody else, he will attain the supreme transcendental destination. So I'm going to say this again tomorrow morning and again tomorrow evening. But it's important to consider propagating Krishna consciousness in this nice way. Now, should I play that little video again? Let me play the little video again. Of produced by Vaisheshika Prabhu's team. Let's see here. Oh. No good. What's going on? How do I get it to work? Technology, smart people, you know how to make it work? What? What?
Looks like it's playing on a different screen. Windows desktop. So you might have to do a Alt tab.
I think it may be this too. There we go. volume isn't so great, but at least you get the idea.
And the world spins out of control. As forests burn and missiles fall, will you sit back and watch it all? Or give the gift and heed the call? See love and peace within the heart of all you meet. As tensions rise and all hope falls, give the cure to solve it all. See peace within the heart of all.
Save Earth now. Okay, now step right over to see. Pretty much. 10 after 8. Any discussion? Your father's got something going on over there.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I think information say when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was present at that time, he had access to Bhagavatam, and that Bhagavatam was only in Sanskrit, I believe, right?
I don't know if it was in Sanskrit or Bengali.
And the translation work was only done into the English and other language only by Srila Prabhupada.
Oh, I don't know if that's true. If between the time of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Prabhupada, there was only one English translation. My guess is there were others, but I don't know. Bhagavatam's a popular book, and people would render it to how, according to their liking. So the elaborate commentary in English, translation and elaborate commentary in English was the great contribution. But if there wasn't anything before that, I don't know. I'm not, religious studies scholar.
Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting that so even though first Bhaktivinoda Thakur read Bhagavatam and then he came in contact with Chaitanya Charitamrita,
Yes.
and then his whole focus was on reviving Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings.
Yes.
Because I think he found that Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita, teaching is same.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. I was thinking about the time management, which is very important in practicing devotional service. So, could you please kindly give us the general way of for a devotee trying to be a devotee? What could be the general way of time management, that what is that we have to give importance to and how to do that?
You're asking for a how to, what or how to? Okay, well, we're all different. I don't do what you do. So the what depends upon your nature and your duties in life. And regulation is important in the how-to. And you, as we just heard this description, I call it blocks of time. But you identify blocks of time, and then you move from this to that to the other in blocks of time. And knowing that you have not unlimited but limited time, you try your best to be fully present during that block of time, and when the time is up, you move on to the next thing. And then the next thing, and you do that as your lifestyle. So the what depends upon your nature, and the how is just blocks of time, and you abide by it. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions, but you try to minimize the exceptions, and from time to time you can recalibrate the blocks of time allotment. For example, supposing it's Krishna Janmashtami or it's Rath Yatra time or something, so you go to plan B, and then as soon as possible, immediately the next day you're at plan A. And stay regulated. Next. Anything? Yes?
Krishna Guru Maharaj. I think when I hear about Bhaktivinoda Thakur sleeping only for 2-3 hours, I think I heard Srila Prabhupada also slept 2-3 hours. So how that mercy is coming, that they get energized.
It's spiritual energy. It's the Krishna connection principle. So each of us, aging is another thing, but each of us has our requirement, and we fulfill our requirement. There's medical advice, and you have different person, different bodies are different, and things, and so many things. But the idea is, in principle, reduce on this side and increase on that side. And just follow that principle. How is it possible? By spiritual energy. Otherwise not possible. Otherwise not possible. We get fuzzy-brained, and worse, probably, ill. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.